Hello crafty friends, I'm Lien from Studio Kato and I'm so glad you're joining me again today. Today I have another watercolor video for you guys. I'm going to make a really simple watercolor background and then do some watercoloring on my images as well. Let's start with the background. I am doing an emboss resist technique, so first I am using the Fantasy Florals stamp set by My Favorite Things to stamp onto my watercolor cardstock. This is Canson Montval 300 GSM watercolor cardstock. I like to use heavyweight cardstock for my backgrounds because I usually add a lot of water to my backgrounds for a loose watercolor effect. I stamped that in Versamark ink and embossed that with Wow Bright White Superfine embossing powder. You can't really see it here on camera, but I promise you the image is there. And I pressed some inks down. These are ink cubes by Concord 9th. I will list all the colors I used in the description below. And I am just doing some ink smushing. I do this really simply by just spraying some water on the ink I pressed down onto my slick surface. And this is just a laminated sheet of white cardstock. And then I can pick it up with some plastic. This is just plastic wrapping from a stamp set. You can use any plastic. Something flexible is usually easier to work with and get some cool effects. And I added one layer first, then heat set everything, and then added a second layer for some more details in the background. And then I set that aside to dry while I watercolored my critters. Now, I stamped these in Versafine Onyx Black ink onto Canson Montval 200 GSM watercolor cardstock, so it's slightly less heavyweight. And I really like it for critters because I fussy cut out all my images, so this is way easier to cut with my scissors. So I'm just painting in my first layer for this bear, and I always put the paint down on the side I want the shading to be, and then I can water that down even more and drag it out to the lighter areas. Now I always work in layers, especially when I want my image to be very heavily shaded. So I am going to go in with a second layer once that first one is dry. And again, I put the paint down on the same area. And then I can blend that out with some clean water. And every time you see my brush move away from the image, I am cleaning my brush and I'm dabbing off any excess water onto a cloth that I keep on the side. When my paintbrush is too wet, when I bring too much water to my image, I get less control over where the color goes. And it usually doesn't work out too well for me. So I always make sure to not bring too much water to my image. And this is the hardest thing to learn with watercolor. You can really only do it from experience. So practice is the key word here. I'm sorry I can't help you more than that. But yeah, you will know when you have too much water or just enough water on your brush just by practicing. Now I'm working on the third layer here, and that is almost the final layer, but not quite. And I'm using a darker paint for this. So I often do this when I notice that my shading isn't intense enough. I go to a darker shade of brown, or I mix a darker shade of brown, and then I can add in my shadows even more intensely. And I do blend that darker shade out as well with some clean water, but not like I did the first layers. I don't go over the entire image again with my clean water or with my watered down paint. I just soften out the line that I put down from the paint, but I don't go quite as far with it. I'm just letting that bear dry completely while I color in my other images. I colored in the bees really simply and the flowers as well. I again just put some paint down in the areas I want darkest and then blend it out with clean water. And when I see that I have too much color on my petals of the flowers, for example, I just clean my brush again and then I take away some of that paint, as you can see me do here. And that really helps with watercolor, but you can't do it with any other medium. So that's what I really like in this one. For the bees, you can see that I saved the black for last. And that's definitely intentional because I usually don't color in quite in the lines. So this just makes it so I don't blend out that black with the yellow if I had done it the other way around. Now there's one more thing I did with the bear, and that's the final but most important step, I think, and I don't see many card makers show this in their videos. I don't know if they do this, but I definitely do, especially if I end up using more than one shade of paint for an image. Like I did with the shading here, I used a different brown for my shading. So what I'm doing here is called glazing, and that basically means that you take a paint very watered down, so it's more water than paint, and you put it over top of your entire image. Make sure your image is completely dry before you do this. And by doing this, you put the same color over top of your entire image, and that makes all of the colors have the same similar tone. So I used a very cool brown for my shading, and I wanted my bear to be a warm tone brown. So I put a warm tone brown glaze over the entire image, and that gives the shading as well a warmer tone than it was originally. And glazing also evens out any slight imperfections that you might have in your painting, so it's a really useful thing to do for your images. Now I let that dry completely, and then I can put my card together. I fussy cut out all my images, and for my card, I put a watercolor cardstock piece over my card base so it would match my my watercolor panel. And behind that watercolor panel, I am also layering 6 pieces of thick white cardstock. These are just backings from stamp sets that I bought. So that's what I use, but I also use just white thick cardstock sometimes. And I just put that together with the Barely Art Precision Craft glue, and then I can center that onto my card base. I'm propping all of my images up on foam tape. And I forgot to mention this, I think, but I die cut the watercolor panel, the background, with a Wonky stitch rectangle die by My Favorite Things as well. So that's the wonderful stitched detail you can see all around the edges. For my matching envelope, I'm being lazy again, and I'm just folding one out of patterned cardstock with my We Are Memory Keepers 123 punch board. I've had a couple of people ask me about this patterned cardstock because I never list it in my descriptions, because this is from Action, so it's by Decotime Crafts. Action is basically a dollar store kind of thing in Europe, and they have some craft items, but they aren't really named. They have product numbers, so I feel really weird listing those in my description, and I also don't think they are available online or anything like that. You're not gonna find the same pack I have probably if you don't happen to go to Action around the same time I did. So that's why I don't list them. They are wonderful patterned cardstock pads, but I don't think you can get them easily online. I really like how this card turned out. I really love how the bear turned out, especially, and on that loose watercolor background. I really love it. I hope you do too. If you did, make sure to leave a thumbs up on this video and leave your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to read them. Of course, you can also subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.